When a smug attorney and a jaded judge encounter Caroline Levitt, they assume it will be a straightforward victory, but what unfolds next is nothing less than a legal tour de force. The courtroom was packed, a mix of journalists, law students, and intrigued spectators crowded the gallery. Whispers buzzed, a soft murmur beneath the towering ceiling of the courthouse. The air carried the scent of aged paper and varnished oak, a whiff of tradition and power. At the defense table, Caroline Levitt leafed through her notes with calm precision, her face inscrutable. This wasn't her first time presenting a case, but it was her debut facing Judge Evelyn Marwood, a figure infamous for her sharp tongue and disdain for inexperienced lawyers, particularly those she deemed untested. The case itself didn't seem extraordinary, a defamation lawsuit pitting a local celebrity against a tabloid alleging damaging falsehoods. But the opposing counsel, Leonard Vaughn, was a seasoned litigator, a man who relished courtroom drama. He was the type to flash a grin before objecting, to charm the room even in a judge-only hearing, and today he had a captivated audience. Caroline knew the deck was stacked against her. She wasn't well known, she lacked elite connections, and she wasn't the sort of lawyer who graced tabloid covers. Yet what she possessed was preparation. As the bailiff summoned the court to order, Judge Marwood swept in, her robe fluttering faintly as she settled into her chair. She adjusted her glasses, peering at the docket. Her eyes darted to Caroline, then to Vaughn, before lingering on her again. "Counselor Levitt," she said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "I see you're defending today." A curt nod. "Yes, Your Honor." She exhaled slowly, as if already bored. "Well, let's hope this doesn't devolve into a libel lesson." A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery. Vaughn smirked openly, not hiding his glee. Caroline didn't flinch. She merely adjusted her stance and waited. Vaughn rose first, delivering a polished, rehearsed opening about truth, reputation, and public harm. His voice was firm, commanding, the kind that could make shaky arguments sound ironclad. He cast his client as a wronged star slandered by a reckless publication. When he finished, he shot Caroline a glance tinged with mock sympathy, as if she were a novice about to stumble through a classroom speech. The judge turned to her. "Counselor, your response?" Caroline stood, smoothing her jacket. Unlike Vaughn, she skipped the theatrics. No dramatic pause, no throat clearing, no fumbling with files. She just spoke. "Your Honor, opposing counsel has spun an engaging tale. Sadly, it's not grounded in evidence or law." The change was instant. Vaughn's grin stiffened. The judge tilted her head slightly, as if only now entertaining the possibility that Caroline might have substance to offer. But skepticism hung thick. She could sense it. She was new. She was underestimated. A brief hush fell over the courtroom, a pause before the expected retort. Judge Marwood sighed through her nose, tapping her gavel lightly on the bench, as if weighing whether to indulge Caroline or brush her aside. "Ms. Levitt," she said, clasping her hands. "That's a bold opener. I trust you've got more than bravado to support it?" A murmur ran through the gallery. A pair of students smirked at each other. Vaughn barely masked his amusement, shaking his head as if this were a pointless detour. Caroline, however, stood unwavering. "Your Honor," she replied coolly, "I'd never rely on bravado alone. I lean on proof." The judge let out a dry, patronizing chuckle. "Good to know. I'd hate for this to turn into a soap opera." Louder laughter this time. Caroline ignored it. She picked up a document before her, hands steady. "If I may, Your Honor, let's consider Reynolds v. Harper Press, a case that directly challenges opposing counsel's assertion that the article's claims were defamatory." Vaughn scoffed softly. "That case is irrelevant here," he said dismissively. "The details don't align." Caroline turned her head slightly, locking eyes with him for the first time since the hearing began. "That's inaccurate. The precedent is pertinent because it hinged on a critical element, the presence of verifiable truth in the statement, which here is also in question." Vaughn blinked, caught off balance for a fleeting second. Judge Marwood's face stayed neutral, though her fingers drummed lightly on the bench. A tell Caroline recognized as a sign she was at least intrigued. "Miss Levitt," the judge said, leaning back, "I admire the effort, but do you truly believe one precedent upends the basic tenets of defamation law?" There it was, the bait. She wanted to lecture her. Caroline didn't waver. She flipped through her binder, producing another document and raising it. Not one precedent, Your Honor. 5. Each affirming the same principle. Statements proven true can't be defamatory. Shall I list them? The courtroom grew still. The judge's fingers paused. Vaughn's smirked. Key ran noticeably. Judge Marwood adjusted her glasses and sighed. Well, Ms. Levitt, since you're so eager to turn this into a law seminar, go ahead and enlighten us. Her sarcasm cut deep, meant to diminish Caroline. She took it as an opening. She opened her folder, knowing her next words would shift everything. Caroline didn't hesitate. She lifted the first document, voice steady and measured. Reynolds v. Harper Press, 2011. The court ruled that, despite reputational harm, a statement backed by evidence isn't defamation. That case was overseen by Judge Carver, who, as you might recall, Your Honor, referenced your own ruling in a parallel matter the next year. Judge Marwood's tapping ceased. Her expression held steady, but Caroline caught the slight squint in her eyes, a spark of recognition that Caroline wasn't just citing cases. She was citing one tied to Marwood's own legal legacy. A few heads in the gallery turned. The room's atmosphere was shifting. Vaughn cleared his throat. That's hardly comparable. That case dealt with a public figure's exposure, unlike what we have here. Caroline didn't glance at him. She reached for the next file. Mason v. Tribune Co., 2016. No public figure distinction, just a truthful report. The plaintiff argued damage, but the court ruled verified facts override harm claims. That case was cited in Ellis v. Darmedia, 2019, where the decision solidified that truth isn't a shield only for the prominent when records back it up. A stillness blanketed the room. Judge Marwood leaned forward slightly, elbow on the bench now. She wasn't smirking anymore. Vaughn shifted in his seat. He'd prepped for a routine argument, one where he could lean on emotional appeals, earn a few nods from the judge, and coast to victory. But Caroline wasn't cooperating. The judge exhaled, rubbing her chin. All right, Miss Levitt, that's a solid batch of citations, but let's be real. Precedents can bend either way. Are you seriously claiming these cases nullify a celebrity's right to sue for defamation? This was the crux, the challenge. She was engaging now, testing Caroline's argument rather than tossing it out. Caroline stood firm. No, Your Honor, I'm not saying defamation suits are invalid. I'm saying they don't hold when the statement's true. If evidence supports the tabloid's claims, harm doesn't make them false. Unless proof shows otherwise, and in this case the article's allegations align with documented events. She turned to Vaughn now, meeting his gaze fully. Do you have proof they're fabricated? The silence was thick. Vaughn's mouth opened, then shut. He shuffled his papers, but Caroline knew the answer before he spoke. He didn't, because it wasn't there. Judge Marwood studied her for a long moment. The dismissive edge was gone. The courtroom's vibe had flipped entirely, and for the first time, it was evident Caroline wasn't just holding steady, she was dominating. A tangible quiet stretched across the courtroom. Caroline had done something neither the judge nor Vaughn anticipated. She'd boxed in the opposition without flair, without exaggeration, just razor-sharp legal reasoning. Vaughn adjusted his tie, scanning his notes as if a rebuttal might materialize. It wouldn't. Caroline had checked. She'd combed every file in the case before entering court, and she knew the tabloid story rested on corroborated sources. No fabrication existed. Judge Marwood exhaled, massaging her temple. Mr. Vaughn, she said at last, voice even, Counselor Levitt has laid out a strong case. Do you have documented evidence showing the article's claims were false? Vaughn faltered, his lips thinning. He wasn't accustomed to being cornered. Your Honor, he started, clinging to traces of the swagger he'd entered with. Reputation is the bedrock of defamation rights. It exists to avoid disputes like this clogging the system. Caroline didn't wait for the judge's reply. She pivoted slightly toward the gallery, speaking to the room as much as the bench. That's an oversimplification, she countered. Reputation is a factor, not a trump card. The moment evidence backs a statement, it overrides assumptions of falsehood. You can't claim harm and dismiss what's proven. The judge leaned forward. So you're saying the celebrity's banking on a lie that doesn't hold? Caroline nodded. Exactly. The tabloid printed facts, and now he's acting like they don't count. The gallery's murmurs swelled. A few students swapped looks. Even the court reporter, stoic through countless dull hearings, seemed faintly curious. Vaughn's irritation was surfacing now. Even without outright lies, he said, the damage gives him a rightful claim. Caroline turned fully toward him. If that held, why does truth excuse defamation? Why bother with a defense the law never meant to limit? Her words sank in. Vaughn had no solid comeback. Judge Marwood, who'd spent the hearing's first half treating Caroline like a rookie, now eyed her with something new. Real regard. She tapped her pen on the desk, face unreadable. That's a persuasive point, Miss Levitt. I assume you've got a suggested resolution? Caroline nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Since the article's claims are true and no falsehood is proven, my client's publication stands free of liability. Vaughn's jaw clenched. The case had slipped from his grasp and he knew it. And for the first time since stepping into the courtroom, Caroline knew it too. Judge Marwood eased back in her chair, sizing Caroline up as if truly seeing her now. The smirk she'd worn earlier had vanished, replaced by something deeper: respect. The courtroom, once dotted with snickers at Caroline's expense, had fallen utterly silent. Vaughn, visibly rattled, sifted through his papers, hunting for anything to claw back his argument. He wouldn't find it. The truth's clarity was ironclad, and Caroline had just made the judge confront it. Marwood let out a slow breath. Miss Levitt, she said, her tone shedding its earlier bite. I'll admit, I didn't expect such a meticulous take on defamation law. Caroline stayed composed. I only work with precision, Your Honor. A few soft chuckles floated through the gallery, now at Vaughn's expense. The judge ignored them and turned to Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, your client's claim hinges on proving falsehood. The defense has cited multiple precedents backing their stance. Do you have anything to refute that? Vaughn paused, a beat too long. He knew he was trapped, but he wouldn't fold easily. He straightened his tie, pivoting tactics. Your Honor, I think we're lost in legal weeds. This case is about fairness at heart. If we start excusing harm over technicalities, we undermine the spirit of defamation. Marwood arched a brow. Excusing harm? That's a leap, counsel. Vaughn pushed on, grasping for traction. This is about reason. Publishers can't be expected to dodge every possible lawsuit with exhaustive proof. Caroline cut in seamlessly. Except when the law explicitly defends truth with evidence. More heads in the gallery turned. The shift was so stark, Vaughn could feel it. He wasn't just losing, he was unraveling. Judge Marwood nodded slowly, fingers tapping the bench. Her silence lingered, making Vaughn squirm. Then, at last, she spoke. Miss Levitt is correct. The words hit like a hammer. Vaughn inhaled sharply, poised to protest, but the judge raised a hand. This court can't ignore the evidence's clear weight. The tabloid proved its claims. The plaintiff's failure to disprove them isn't a technicality. It's decisive. It was done. Vaughn knew it, the judge knew it, and Caroline, standing poised and steady, knew it too. The onlookers swapped glances, buzzing about how this had played out. What began as a predictable case with a judge and counsel brushing Caroline off had morphed into a legal spectacle no one foresaw. And Judge Marwood, once quick to mock her, now had to reckon with her brilliance. Judge Marwood sat quiet for a moment, fingers still brushing the bench. Her own ruling's weight hung in the air. Her demeanor had fully flipped, from aloof to thoughtful, from amused to awed. Vaughn, meanwhile, was still groping for an out. His lips parted as if to argue, but no ground remained. The evidence was explicit. The law backed Caroline. The judge had just confirmed it. But he wouldn't surrender yet. Your Honor, Vaughn said at last, forcing calm over his fraying nerves. If we buy this reading, we risk setting an impossible bar. Celebrities will be paralyzed by rigid proof demands. Judge Marwood gave him a flat stare. Mr. Vaughn, I don't see how expecting falsehood to be proven is paralyzing. A chuckle swept the gallery. Vaughn's face tightened. Caroline stayed perfectly still, observing the exchange. She didn't gloat, didn't grin, didn't react beyond what mattered. Victory wasn't about fanfare. It was about mastery, and she held it now. The judge sighed, rubbing her temple before facing Caroline again. Miss Levitt, she said, a trace of grudging respect in her voice, you've delivered one of the sharpest defenses I've seen in a case like this. Caroline dipped her head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. Marwood gestured toward Vaughn. And sadly for the plaintiff, you've left them no legal leg to stand on. A final strike. Vaughn bristled, but recovery was impossible. He could file appeals, seek delays, dodge the inevitable, but the outcome was set. Judge Marwood sighed and adjusted her robe. Given the article's proven truth and no counter-evidence, the court rules for the defense. The plaintiff's defamation claim is denied, and the tabloid stands clear of liability. We'll reconvene for any ancillary matters. The gavel fell. The case was sealed. The gallery erupted softly, murmurs, stunned looks, and a few approving nods from veteran lawyers. Vaughn's shoulders slumped as he gathered his papers, dodging Caroline's gaze as he slipped away. He'd misjudged her. They all had. As Caroline packed her files, she sensed someone lingering. She glanced up to see Judge Marwood still at the bench, watching her with an enigmatic look. "Miss Levitt," she said after a pause, voice softer now, "you'll go far in this field. Just don't make too many old judges look foolish along the way." A few quiet laughs. Even Caroline permitted a faint smile. "I'll try my best, Your Honor." She turned, exiting the courtroom with the same quiet confidence she'd entered with, except now everyone knew her name. Caroline stepped out, her heels clicking on the polished marble as she exhaled softly. The tension of the past hour hadn't fully left her, but the gravity of her triumph was settling in. She'd won, not just the case, but something bigger, credibility. Down the hall, she heard the whispers. A few clerks muttered to each other, stealing glances her way. A junior partner from a big firm, someone she vaguely knew, gave her a nod as he passed. They didn't say it, but they'd seen it. A judge who'd scoffed at her, a counsel who'd belittled her, a gallery braced for her defeat, all watching her dismantle a claim with surgical legal skill. She reached the courthouse steps and inhaled the crisp afternoon air. Then she heard it. "Miss Levitt?" She turned. Leonard Vaughn stood a few feet off, his face unreadable. For a beat, they stood silent. Vaughn, ever the polished attorney, masked his feelings well, but Caroline saw it, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers clutched his file too tightly. He wasn't furious. He was humbled. "You put on quite a performance in there," he said at last, voice controlled, tone even. But Caroline caught the reluctant admiration beneath it. She didn't crow. She didn't smirk. She just nodded. "I wasn't performing. I was proving the law." A flicker crossed his face. Irritation, acceptance, perhaps both. "Well," he said, tucking the folder under his arm, "don't expect every judge to enjoy being schooled like that." "I don't expect anything," she replied. "I prepare for everything." Vaughn let out a short breath, almost a laugh, then nodded once and walked off. Caroline watched him vanish down the steps before turning to the street. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her client. "Claim denied. You're clear. We'll call with details." A moment later, 3 dots blinked. Then, "You're amazing. Thank you." Caroline pocketed her phone, finally letting a small smile break through. Because today wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring the next time she entered a courtroom, no one would dare underestimate Caroline Levitt again. But then, as she descended the steps, a sealed envelope slipped from her bag, one she hadn't noticed before. It bore the celebrity's signature, addressed to the tabloid. Inside was a confession, admitting the falsehoods were his own planted leaks to boost fame. Caroline froze. The case wasn't over. It had just begun. The story of Caroline Levitt in the courtroom unveils powerful lessons about resilience, preparation, and the triumph of truth over perception. One central message is the value of unwavering determination in the face of doubt. Caroline, underestimated by a dismissive judge and a smug opponent, proves that skill and evidence outweigh arrogance and bias. This teaches us that external judgments don't define our worth, our actions and readiness do. In life, we often encounter skeptics or obstacles that test our resolve, whether in career pursuits, personal goals, or standing up for what's right. Caroline's meticulous preparation highlights another lesson. Success stems from diligence, not luck. By mastering her facts, she transforms a seemingly lost cause into a victory, showing that thorough effort can shift any narrative. Finally, the twist, revealing the celebrity's deception, underscores the importance of seeking truth beneath appearances. In our lives, this translates to questioning assumptions, digging deeper in relationships or decisions, and valuing integrity over superficial wins. Caroline's journey inspires us to prepare relentlessly, stand firm against doubt, and pursue truth, ensuring we not only survive challenges, but redefine how others see us, profoundly shaping our paths forward.